You're listening to Science Coast with Mallory Havens and
Chris White.
And today we want to talk about how science kind of infiltrates everything in our lives, or as I phrased it, innervates, which is a new word for Chris.
It's a big word. It's a biology word. Biology words scare me.
Basically, innervate means to make nerves or grow nerves into. And I'm using it in the context of saying in society, science is so prevalent in absolutely everything in the way we function on a daily basis, because all of the inventions we have, things we don't even realize, have taken research and development to make, and it's just ever present.
And I love the framing. And when you told me that this is the topic that you wanted to cover today, and I had to look up the word innervate, and I'm now in love with the word.
It's lifelong learning.
And I wish to misuse it on a regular basis over the coming weeks. But no, this is absolutely true. I totally understand what you are trying to talk about, and it's just true. And one of the things I always try to do in the classroom is talk to the students about how they need to see the various topics that we're discussing in class in the world that's around them. It's just embedded. And for those of us who've had an extensive science education and now are teaching other students, we can't help but see the science everywhere we go.
Right. For sure. In my interdisciplinary seminar class yesterday, we were talking about how all the different uses for parts of a pig. So, so the course is about human and animal relationships and science and ethics and theology. But when you think about a pig, what do you think its uses are for humans?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is just that it's a food source.
Sure. Yeah.
But I do know that there are pet pigs that there are certain groups of people who absolutely adore their pet pigs.
Sure.
I feel as if wild hogs have a important niche in wild ecosystems, or at least they would have significant impact.
They do.
On ecosystems.
So also there's pig fibers or proteins in like gel capsules of all your medicine. Gelatin from pigs
gelatin
are used
is
as,
animal.
Yeah, used
Made
as
from animal
stabilizers and vaccines. Their hairs are used in paintbrushes. There's proteins from pigs in ammunition, which kind of is crazy, but it's true. They are in soap, in lotion.
I recently discovered over the past year, in part because my son is a vegan, that the processing of white sugar from cane sugar, converting it into white sugar involves animal products, in particular bones. And I'm wondering if pig bones are used in the processing of sugar.
I'm not sure about pigs specifically, but that makes sense. There's bone ash in train brakes. There's all sorts of bone materials and fibers and gelatin and all sorts of stuff in glue. And then, there's that old adage, right? The horse, take the horse to the glue factory when it's out of usefulness. So the whole reason I bring that up is not to put you through my Animals and Us lecture, but to think about how all of these things had to be developed over time, and we don't know necessarily what's in our products, and products that are just part of our everyday life have gone through this whole research development process.
So are we supposed to be afraid, or
no?
Are we supposed to just educate ourselves? I'm assuming that at some point, reasonably responsible human beings, when they were developing these products, had good reasons for doing what they did.
Right.
And so we take so much for granted. And so do you think we should, when we're talking to the general public, should we just make them aware of how important past developments are to the economy today?
Perhaps, and just realize that we're not necessarily aware of everything that we're using in our raw materials. But it's important to not be afraid of it, because if you're suddenly going to be afraid of gelatin or other animal products, then you should probably throw out all the soap in your house.
Well, yeah, that's another question. Do you actually know how the soap is made? And we've established
quite well that washing your hands and bathing helps prevent disease.
Yes. That's what I'm
Which,
told.
Yeah, I mean, there was a period of time, right, in the Middle Ages, or I'm not sure the time period, where people didn't bathe and they thought it was bad to bathe. But they also had things like the plague, so.
Maybe we could have a microbiology lab where you take random students out of the hallway and swab their fingers. And
Oh, we kind of do that in general
Do you?
biology. We make them swab parts of their body and the environment and see what grows. And I've seen
how
studies.
long have you been doing this?
Years.
Okay.
But there's also been studies where they take toddler hands and put them on petri dishes, and adult hands put them on petri dishes, and toddlers, because they are in everything and don't wash their hands as frequently as adults, grow so much more disgusting stuff.
Wow. It's so much more interesting up on the biology floor.
Well, I haven't done toddler hands here. I've just seen it in the literature.
Well, you've seen toddler hands.
Yeah, I have. They're pretty gross. I personally wouldn't lay down on a public floor and cry, but toddlers do that.
Yeah. Crawl under things. That's
Yeah.
right. And they have this habit of sticking their hands in their mouth, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, building their immune systems.
Wow. So you've been focusing a bit on the biology. In other words, the animals, the use of various animals. How do you think this idea of science innervating the world happens in other disciplines?
Well, I'm not entirely as sure, but I would think if you look at, say, physics, that we have learned a lot about, say, combustion engines and going into space and the universe and things that the space program, developing many things, not plastic, as we've established in a previous episode.
Teflon.
But has developed a lot of things through these processes of trying to accomplish one goal. There's a lot of other things that are made, also trying to make sustainable energy sources with physics. How do you think, as a physicist, physics impacts our everyday life, apart from gravity?
Well, I do know that in the process of doing basic research, you have to invent new technologies. In the field of particle physics, where I've done my research, you have to create these particle accelerators. And then it turned out that you could use particle accelerators to fight cancer. And so at the National Laboratory for many years was a radiation therapy facility that it was groundbreaking. Nobody was doing it previously.
Right.
And so there were these cancer patients who weren't necessarily responding to chemotherapy, and so they were bringing them in and doing dedicated proton beam therapy. And it was interesting for me to note that this was happening back in the 1980s and 1990s, and then today there are proton therapy clinics,
right,
where they're building small particle accelerators, and then and so this is an offshoot of particle physics research, is this creation of this particular type of cancer therapy. Also, superconducting magnets and superconducting magnetic coils had to be invented so that you could build these particle accelerators. Certain types of electronics were invented so that we could collect the data that we needed to from our, from the various experiments that were built. You'd mentioned earlier about the Apollo mission, how in order to send a human to the moon, you had to invent a whole bunch of stuff.
right.
And so the basic infrastructure associated with doing science is in its very nature exploratory and inventive.
Right.
And there are so many scientists who move from the lab to entrepreneurship because they come up with various ideas and they create things that didn't exist before in the process of their research. And it's, I could sell this.
Right.
I could market this. I could tweak this, and it's going to become useful. So one of the things that I've commented about, I'm sorry, I'm talking a long time, is that the basic research done today will be driving the economy tomorrow.
Right, and not just the finances of it, but just comfort in life and how we live, like air conditioning and not having to light a fire to stay warm, but using a furnace, insulation so our houses aren't so drafty.
So science is continually improving the quality of life for everybody.
Right.
And Then the issue is whether we can do it in an equitable fashion so that...
And an ethical fashion.
Ooh, could you go a little bit more about that?
Just in a way where we're not harming other people or the environment as we make new things. So I think there's a lot of good intentions in science that maybe you don't always see the outcomes. So inventions like plastic that can damage the environment quite substantially, microplastics in human blood. Or I want to give the example of trans fats and hydrogenated oils. So do you know why those were invented?
Maybe.
So they're basically from food processing where they took healthy fats and tried to make them behave like animal fats, which are considered less healthy.
Oh.
And so they chemically modified them either by making bonds lay flat that are normally bent or by breaking double bonds and throwing on hydrogen, which they're like, oh, it's from a healthy source, a plant, and now it's going to be solid at room temperature and you can have your fake butter and all that. But it turns out that's much worse for your health than animal fats.
Yeah. So as you were talking, I was like, oh, this is about melting point.
Yes. Yes.
Because the plant oils, that you buy are liquid at room temperature.
Right.
An animal. Oh, okay. I'm with you here.
Yeah, so there were good intentions there, right? Like trying to use a healthier fat to reduce harmful fats in the diet, but as a consequence, it actually had a negative impact on cardiovascular health. So that would be
Just
maybe
eat more
some.
oatmeal.
There you go. Perfect. But that'd be an example of something that wasn't intentionally bad, but the continued production of these things is perhaps not ethical.
Oh, fair. And that's partly who gets to decide, because if there's money to be made, then there's going to be an incentive. If you think about the opioid issue and the sack litters, and
yes,
so there was originally a need for a new type of a painkiller,
right?
Because there is a lot of human suffering,
right?
And we want people to be comfortable in certain situations, but then there is this the way in which it was marketed, the way in which it was pushed out, the way in which it was just I guess, mass produced.
Right. And the treatment regimen or protocol was not necessarily the most efficient, like maybe not higher doses 12 hours apart, but should have been lower doses, maybe 6 hours apart. You would have had less of a problem.
So this notion of science and this notion of science inquiry and science advances are basically driving a lot of what we see happening in the world around us.
Right. And we went from saying all these positive things to saying all these maybe negative things where you don't know the consequences right away, or we still need science and invention to drive the economy and also to like bring us new things that are good, and we can use science to fix old mistakes.
It's interesting what you just pointed out, though, because I think you're absolutely right. We take for granted the advances as being, oh yeah, that's just the new baseline,
right?
And I think about the agricultural revolution from the 20th century, and there was some concern whether we were going to be able to have enough food to feed the number of people that were on the planet in like 1960, 1970, 1980. And then there was the creation of all these artificial fertilizers, and science came to the rescue in some sense,
right?
And increased crop yields so that we could feed the world. And now it's just, we don't even think about that.
Right.
But it wasn't a given that was possible.
Right. Yeah.
Until science made it possible. And now all we think about is, oh, those scientists, they create these pesticides and they create these other things and it's causing cancer. And we don't think about the billions of people that those pesticides and various other things fed.
Right. And how the nitrogen from fertilizer allows people to eat and survive, and the animals that are raised in agriculture allows them to eat and survive. But it also runs off into the watershed and causes algae blooms and other kinds of toxic events in water, because nitrogen is a limiting resource. And when you give enough of it to ecosystems, then things that couldn't grow before now have enough nitrogen to be able to grow, and then use up all the oxygen and create anoxic zones and kill all the fish in an area.
Unintended consequences. So we try to address a particular issue, and then end up addressing that issue and potentially making it better, but then it has ripple effects elsewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
And there isn't an easy solution to that. So as science innervates society, we have to think about, try to visualize what might happen or continue to do research on the things we develop so we can figure out what those consequences are and hopefully get ahead of them.
Awesome. All right. Very cool.
Well, the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Lewis University. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes only. The Lewis University name and all forms and abbreviations are the property of its owner and in its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. This podcast was produced in the WLRA podcast studios at Lewis University. Visit lewisu.edu for more information about Lewis University. You've been listening to Science Coast with Mallory Havens and
Chris White.
Thanks.
Bye.